When you hear the word magic or supernatural in the context of American history, where does your brain go? I mean, I'm guessing it's straight to the Salem witch trials, right?
Yeah, that's the default setting for most of us, I think. We tend to view magic through that very specific colonial Western lens.
Right. Puritans, bonfires, mass hysteria in New England.
Exactly. It's usually framed as either pure fantasy, like something from a storybook, or as paranoia. You know, ignorant people in the woods being terrified of things they just don't understand.
Right. It's seen as a fringe belief.
Yeah.
But today, for you listening, we are going to completely flip the map. We are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating paper by Maura McNamara. It's titled Magic and the Supernatural in the African American Slave Culture and Society. And honestly, this research kind of blew my mind.
It's incredible.
Because it suggests that for the 4 million enslaved people in the Antebellum South, magic wasn't just spooky stories or naive superstition. It was a lot more than that.
No, not at all. It was actually a technology.
A technology. That is a really strong word to use for ghosts and spells.
It is, but I genuinely think it fits perfectly. McNamara argues that we can't just look at this as folklore to be dismissed. We have to look at it as a rival power structure. You really have to imagine the Antebellum South as having 2 totally distinct layers of reality.
Okay, 2 layers.
Yeah, so you have the white world of daylight, that's the laws, the whips, the plantation economics, and public Christianity. But then when the sun goes down, you have this entire other world, a world of conjure-flying spirits and ancestors that the slaveholders they couldn't touch, they couldn't control it, and often they didn't even know it existed.
I love that image of the 2 worlds. It's like a secret layer of reality right under their noses. Yeah. And usually, when I read about this era, historians focus so heavily on the church, the invisible institution, they call it.
Right, the standard narrative.
Yeah, they talk about how African religion blended with Christianity. You get these spirituals, the hope for heaven, the stories of Moses leading his people out of Egypt.
And that standard narrative of syncretism is totally valid. It happened. But McNamara is pointing out a massive gap in that story. She's essentially asking, okay, sure, they went to church. They sang the spirituals. But what did they do when they needed to solve a problem right now?
Because the church was about later.
Exactly. The church offered salvation in the next life. But if you needed to stop a master from beating you today, or make someone fall in love with you, or figure out why you suddenly went deaf-tile, you didn't go to the preacher for that.
You went to the Conjurer.
You went to the Conjurer. And that distinction creates this really fascinating tension. You have this public faith for the soul, and then this private, darker, much more practical toolkit for the body and for the daily grind of survival.
So let's actually open up that toolkit. Because to understand the tools, I think we have to understand the universe they were living in. And this worldview doesn't start in Georgia or Mississippi. It starts in West Africa, doesn't it?
It does. McNamara relies on historical records from traders like William Bozeman to map out this theology that survived the Middle Passage. And it's a very strict hierarchy. At the absolute top, you have the high god.
The creator.
The creator, associated with the sky, all-powerful, all-knowing. But, and this is the really critical part, he is distant.
Distant how, exactly? Like hard to hear or just doesn't care?
Closer to doesn't care, or perhaps just too busy. Think of the high god as the CEO of a massive global conglomerate. He's sitting way up in the penthouse suite. He set up the laws of physics. He built the building. He signed the incorporation papers. But he is far too exalted to worry about whether the photocopier on the 3rd floor is jammed or if you didn't get your lunch break.
That actually makes a tremendous amount of sense, specifically for an enslaved person. I mean, if you're living in a world of such extreme daily suffering, families being separated, brutal violence.
Yeah.
The idea of a personal, loving God who is micromanaging your life might actually be much harder to believe than a God who is just completely absent.
That is a really sharp insight. It solves the problem of suffering, or what theologians call theodicy. If the high God is just the architect, you don't blame him for the day-to-day misery. He's just not involved in the day-to-day. But of course, that leaves a massive power vacuum. If the CEO isn't running the office, who is?
Middle management.
Middle management. And in this cosmology, that role is filled by the lesser spirits. The government of the world, as the sources put it, is entirely committed to them. They are the ones who decide if it rains, if your crops die, if you get sick, or if you find a coin on the road. And McNamara notes a really cool detail here. The defining characteristic of these spirits in the slave cosmology is flight.
They're flying spirits.
Right. And here is where the technology aspect really comes back into play. Unlike the high god, you absolutely cannot ignore these spirits. The high god doesn't need your snacks or your prayers. But the spirits, They are incredibly high maintenance.
So they need attention.
Oh, yeah. They require dutiful praise, sacrifice, obedience. It's a highly transactional relationship.
So it's not really about faith in the modern Christian sense. It's literally about management. You have to manage these spirits just to keep your life from completely falling apart.
Precisely. And that explains why magic wasn't just some fringe activity for a few eccentric people on the plantation. It was the practical day-to-day management of your life. If you wanted to solve a problem, you didn't appeal to the CEO, you talked to the manager who could actually fix it.
Okay, so let's talk about those managers. Or in this case, the spirits that needed the most management because they were the most terrifying. We have to talk about witches.
The night visitors.
Now I have to pause here because my brain immediately goes to the Wicked Witch of the West. Green skin, broomstick cackling. Or maybe the Puritan idea of a woman who signed a book with the devil.
And that is exactly what McNamara warns us against. If you project that European witch onto this culture, you miss the point entirely. In the African-American slave worldview, the witch wasn't a human woman who sold her soul to Satan. In fact, the devil is almost completely absent from their witch lore.
That is wild to me. Because the white missionaries and the slave owners were completely obsessed with the devil. You'd think that would have trickled down into the folklore.
You really would think so. But the enslaved people fiercely maintained their own definition. For them, the witch was something older. It was a writing spirit, a malevolent soul that could shed its skin. It wasn't a person with a heart. It was just this pure malevolent force.
The description of writing in the paper is visceral.
Yeah.
It actually gave me chills reading it.
It really is terrifying. There's a testimony from an ex-slave named Robert Phillips. He describes the witch coming in at night and sitting on his chest. He says, you wake up, you can't move, you can't breathe. You just feel this heavy weight pressing the life right out of you.
Which, looking at it through a modern medical lens, sounds exactly like sleep paralysis.
It is textbook sleep paralysis. But try to imagine experiencing that without any modern medical knowledge. You don't know about REM cycles or brain chemistry. To them, it was a literal supernatural assault. If you couldn't throw the witch off, you could die, or worse, become possessed.
And the shape-shifting element just creates this incredible paranoia where anything could be a witch.
Right, because the witch leaves its human skin behind in order to fly. It can turn into a cat, a dog, even an insect. It can slip right through a keyhole. It means nowhere is ever truly safe. Your cabin, which is supposed to be your one sanctuary from the fields, is penetrable.
But this is why I love this, but paper people didn't just lie there and take it. They fought back. There's that incredible folklore story. McNamara includes the wee Winnie witchy tale.
Oh, the skin story. It's an absolute classic.
So for you listening, if you haven't heard this one, the belief was that the witch had to take off her skin to go riding. So in the story, this character, Mama Granny, finds the witch's skin just lying around while the witch is out tormenting people. And she decides to booby trap it. She fills the skin with hot pepper and salt.
Ouch. Talk about a rude awakening.
Right. So the witch wee Winnie comes back, tries to slip her skin back on, and she is, quote, burnt to a crisp.
And see, that's not just a fun bedtime story to scare kids. That folklore dictated actual reality. McNamara documents enslaved people genuinely sprinkling salt and red pepper around their homes or around the beds of people they suspected were witches.
It's a defense mechanism. It's a way of saying, I might not own my own body, I might not legally own this house, but I have this pepper and I can keep the spirits out.
Exactly. It's a reclamation of space. It turns a completely helpless situation into one where you finally have some agency.
Okay, so witches are the heavy hitters. Malevolent, dangerous, terrifying. But not all the flying spirits were that aggressive, right? We also have to talk about the Duppies.
The Duppies, or ghosts. Now, this is a very different vibe. Witches want to ride you, ghosts mostly just want to mess with you.
They're tricksters.
They are. Zora Neale Hurston, the famous anthropologist and author, collected a lot of these stories. In her research, the ghosts aren't dragging you down to hell. They're stealing your umbrella. They're hiding the hoe so you can't weed the garden.
Which is so interesting because isn't that exactly what enslaved people often did to resist? We always hear about silent sabotage, slowing down work or losing tools to break the pace of forced labor.
That's a brilliant connection. In a way, the ghost is acting out the subconscious desires of the living. I wish I could stop working, but if I stop, I get whipped. Well, for the ghost hid the tool, so now we have to stop that one. That's not my fault. It projects that resistance onto the spirit world.
It creates a buffer. But there is a darker side to the ghost lore, too, specifically when it comes to the masters. This part really struck me.
Yes. This is where the supernatural deeply intersects with the trauma of slavery. There is a powerful testimony from Lewis Clark, a former slave. He said he was just as afraid of his master when he was dead as he was when he was alive.
That is profound.
Yeah.
And heartbreaking. The fear was so deep it literally outlasted death.
It did. There is a genuine, pervasive belief that a cruel master could return from the grave to continue the torment. But conversely, and this is key, there was also a belief that dead slaves could return to demand justice.
It levels the playing field.
Completely. In life, the master holds all the cards. He has the gun, the whip, the law behind him. But in death, the spirit of a mistreated slave is a force to be reckoned with. A white master can't whip a ghost.
So just like with the witches, people develop these really complex rituals to ghost-proof their lives.
Ghost-proofing is a great term for it. It's all about establishing boundaries. McNamara lists several methods. For example, burying a corpse face down.
Face down? Why face down?
The logic is that if the spirit wakes up and becomes confused and tries to dig its way out, it will dig down deeper into the earth instead of up toward the living. It traps them. Or another one is placing a broom across the front door.
And my favorite one, the mustard seeds.
The mustard seeds are fascinating because you actually see this in European vampire folklore too, but it appears here in a very specific context. The belief is that spirits suffer from an overwhelming compulsion to count things. If you scatter mustard seeds at your doorstep, the ghost has to count every single one before it can cross the threshold.
It's like hacking the supernatural operating system. Error must complete counting task.
Essentially, yes. If you scatter enough seeds, they're too busy counting to haunt you until sunrise, and then they have to leave. It's a brilliant practical solution to a supernatural problem.
It really is. So we've got the enemies, the witches and the ghosts. But we haven't touched on the most important group yet. The ones who weren't enemies or tricksters, but literally the glue holding the entire community together, the ancestors.
This is the bedrock. In this West African-derived worldview, death isn't an exit. The dead are not gone. They are highly active participants in the community.
Harriet Jacobs has a beautiful quote in the paper. The living never forget that they are the trustees of the dead.
Trustees. Really think about that word. It implies a serious responsibility, a debt you owe.
So the ancestors are always watching.
Always watching. And they functioned as the strict custodians of law and custom. If you neglected your traditions or if you acted shamefully, you weren't just letting yourself down. You were risking the wrath of your ancestors. They could send sickness. They could send bad luck.
So it's a very real form of social control. Behave yourself or grandma is going to ground you from the afterlife.
Basically. But this totally explains why funerals were such a massive, massive deal in slave culture.
Yeah, the paper mentions that graves were lavishly decorated.
You had to send the soul off correctly. If the rites were incomplete, the soul would linger. It would become restless, maybe even malevolent. So even in a system where enslaved people owned almost nothing, where their own bodies were legally considered property, they would go to incredible lengths to ensure a proper burial. They would collect broken bits of pottery glass, personal items to meticulously decorate the grave.
It was a way of saying this person mattered.
And this person is still with us. It maintained the relationship. It affirmed their humanity in a world that literally tried to deny it every single day.
Okay, so we've mapped the territory. High God up top, meddling spirits, dangerous witches, protective ancestors. But here is where we get to the real pivot point of the deep dive. The moment where we move from just believing in spirits to actually using them. Conjure. This is the big aha moment for me. Because up until now, the spirits are things that happen to you. But conjure, that's active.
Conjure is the application. It is the specific method by which humans communicate with and manipulate these spiritual powers to get actual results. And this is where McNamara argues so strongly that magic becomes a form of active political resistance.
There are two stories in the paper that really illustrate this beautifully, and they are wild. The first one is about a man named Henry Clay Bruce.
This is a perfect example of communal resistance. So Bruce describes a group of slaves who found out they were going to be deported to the Deep South.
Which we should clarify for anyone listening was basically a death sentence, or at least a guarantee that you'd never see your family again.
Yeah.
Being sold down the river was the ultimate threat slaveholders used.
Exactly. It was the absolute worst case scenario. Now, usually history books tell us they would have just had to accept it. They had no legal recourse, but they didn't accept it. They pooled what little resources they had and hired a conjurer.
And what happened?
The relocation was aborted, just canceled at the last minute.
And here's the key that I really don't want to miss. They didn't call it luck.
No, they did not. They credited the Conjurer entirely. In their minds, they had fought back against the slave owners and they had won using spiritual weapons. It gave them a profound sense of victory in a situation that was explicitly designed to make them feel powerless. Even if we, looking back from the modern day, might say, oh, that was just a bureaucratic coincidence, they experienced it as a successful rebellion.
Then there's the story of Clara Walker. Now, this one is a little less about community defense and a lot more about personal revenge.
Personal vengeance, yes. Clara talks about a witch doctor who made a mud doll. She stuck a needle in its back to specifically inflict pain on a very cruel master.
Classic voodoo doll style.
Right. And the historical narrative says the master actually came down with a misery in his back.
Think about the massive power dynamic shift there. You have a bondswoman who legally has absolutely zero power. She can be beaten, sold, killed on a whim without consequence. But in the total privacy of her cabin, she is inflicting physical pain on her master.
It completely inverts the hierarchy. It's really no wonder these practitioners, these root workers or conjurers held such immensely high status in the community. McNamara cites a journalist from the era who described a local bondswoman as a, quote, goddess. Her words were literally accepted as oracles by the people around her.
Because she had the power to hurt the people who were hurting them every day.
Or to help. It's important to note, it wasn't just about fighting white people. It was also about very human personal desires. Love, petty rivalries, daily anxieties.
The original love potion.
Exactly. There's that great story of old Bab Russ who used conjure to make a girl love him regardless of the fact that she was already engaged to someone else.
Which is morally questionable, sure, but it proves that they had complex inner lives. It wasn't all just about reacting to the masters all the time.
Right. But on a much deeper psychological level, Conjure provided a framework for understanding tragedy. And this is absolutely crucial for mental survival under slavery.
What do you mean by that, a framework for tragedy?
We'll take the story of Hannah Weil in the text. She suddenly becomes deaf and starts having these severe, dizzy spells. Now, in a modern medical context, we'd run tests and diagnose that. Maybe it's Meniere's disease or severe ear infection. But for her, the explanation was that she had been conjured after her husband left her.
It gives a specific reason for the suffering.
Yes. Random, meaningless misfortune is terrifying. Why me is a terrible psychological burden. But if you are deaf because someone specifically put a spell on you, that's terrible, sure, but it's explainable. It means the world still operates by rules, even if those rules are currently being used against you. It creates order out of total chaos.
That reminds me so much of the Pau Sandy tale she includes.
Oh, the poor guy turned into a tree.
Literally turned into a tree because of a lost spell gone horribly wrong.
It's a cautionary tale, obviously. But again, it reinforces the idea that the supernatural is real. It has tangible consequences, and it explains why bad things happen to ordinary people. It validates their lived reality.
So when we step back from all the details and look at this whole system, from the distant high CEO god to the pepper in the witch skin to the mud dolls and the mustard seeds, what is the big takeaway here? Why does this matter for us today?
I think the fundamental takeaway is that for the 4 million enslaved people in the South, this wasn't just quaint superstition. It was a highly sophisticated alternative system of power.
Power really is the operative word here, isn't it?
It is everything. The institution of slavery tried systematically to strip them of all human agency. It controlled their physical bodies, their time, their families, their labor. But it couldn't control their minds, and it couldn't control this rich spiritual world they reconstructed in the dark.
So when they sprinkled salt to stop a witch from riding them, or when they pooled their money to pay a conjurer to stop a deportation, they were actively reclaiming their humanity.
Exactly. They were explaining the unexplainable, and they were fighting the unbeatable. Conjure offered a psychological escape hatch that the slaveholders simply couldn't close no matter how hard they tried. The master might legally own the daylight, but he definitely didn't own the dark.
That gives me chills. It really makes you rethink how we conventionally tell history. We usually focus so heavily on the laws, the economics, the wars, all this stuff formally written on paper.
Right, the records of the powerful, the people who own the printing presses.
Exactly. But if we want to truly understand the human experience of the past, maybe we need to pay a lot more attention to the things we usually just dismiss as folklore.
I strongly believe we do. We need to listen to the ghost stories and the superstitions, because that is where the real hopes, the deep fears, and the secret resistance of marginalized people are actually hiding in plain sight.
That is a fantastic place to leave it for you to think about. How much of actual history is hidden in the stories we only tell in the dark.
A lot more than we think.
Well, thanks for diving into this fascinating world with us today.
It was my absolute pleasure.
And thank you so much for listening. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.